Welcome to Two Millennials and Mom, where we bring you engaging conversations and respectful disagreement across the social spectrum.
Injected with the quirks of everyday life.
Curl up as we navigate the complexities of this modern world with all the humor and warmth we can muster.
And the occasional gentle ribbing. We're glad you're here. Happy listening.
While I would generally consider myself to be a moderate politically, many of you may already know that I tend to sit considerably further to the right than my other hosts on the so-called political spectrum. This being the case, I often feel as if I have to be the one to defend against criticisms of certain conservative ideologies and stand against some liberal stances, specifically the ones that I perceive to have a potentially devastating impact on our society and the people in it. That's not what we're here for today. This episode is about analyzing what being conservative means, what they're supposed to stand for, and why. Some people think of conservative like a four-letter word, while others wear it as a badge of honor. Today isn't about a party platform. It isn't about being right, as in correct. It's about understanding the what and why behind the ideas and values that shape the way certain people perceive the world and why they may want to keep it the way it is.
You know, our mom has said that millennials aren't sentimental, that we're the generation that would throw out our grandmother's china without blinking. And she's not totally wrong. We tend to value innovation over tradition and progress over preservation. So it makes sense that conservative values can feel foreign or even frustrating to somebody like me. But when I sat down and I really listened to friends, to family members, especially to friends that I don't agree with, I started to hear something more complicated. Not just politics, but values. A desire to protect what feels sacred. A fear of losing stability or identity. And when I made space to understand their why, I found myself thinking differently, even when I didn't land in the same place as them. That doesn't mean I agree with every conclusion. It does mean that I have to listen differently, though. So today isn't about agreeing. Respectful disagreement, remember? It's a chance for us to slow down and really unpack what conservative values are, not just what they aren't. It's to challenge our assumptions and maybe even our egos. It's about listening generously, questioning responsibly, and participating courageously. Because again, that's where growth happens. So we're walking into this with open ears and a little bit of humility.
When I was growing up, the word conservative wasn't political. It was personal. It meant respecting your elders, working hard, maybe going to church on Sunday, patriotism. It meant you didn't rock the boat unless the boat was sinking. And over time, I've watched that word become more and more loaded and sometimes even weaponized against people. But I still believe there's value in slowing down and asking, what are we trying to protect here? That's the heart of conservative thinking, even if we don't always agree with how it shows up. This episode is about stepping into that space, not to be right, but to be real. Because participating in a healthy democracy means being willing to understand people we disagree with, especially when it's hard.
Welcome to Two Millennials and Mom. I'm Callie.
I'm Cole.
And I'm Mom.
Should be an interesting one. So I think this may have kind of been the point, but I also think that it illustrates how much we as a society miss the point these days, especially with our interactions online. Some of you may have seen a reel that I posted earlier this week asking what are conservative values. And I don't think a lot of people really listened or understood the question, because it was very much not what are conservatives doing right or wrong, or what is good or bad about conservatives. Is what are the core tenets of their thought process? What are their values? What do they believe in? What do they represent? And some of the answers we got were
Pretty harsh.
A little vitriol there.
Yeah. Racism, bigotry, hatred of poor, misogyny, and greed was one that stuck out to me. Man, I really hope that that's not actually the case, because if you have a thought process, a belief system that is based solely on those as the tenets, then
we're in a lot of trouble.
We're in a lot of trouble, even if I agree with you on some things policy-wise. You're doing it for the wrong reasons. I think one of our respondents was really, I think there were two that were pretty close to right. So shout out to Alan, who said smaller government, lower taxes, individualism, fiscal responsibility, traditional American values, and a free market. He also mentions, now the ones that he runs across, And what they actually do with a really long ellipses there implies that it may not be quite the same. But the one that got me the most was Moses saying, yeah, none of these are right. And I think for the most part, he was pretty spot on, because there was, like Mom said, a lot of vitriol in the response to that question.
So as I was prepping for this, I was trying to figure out what that really looked like to me. And I think that I do come to it from a more historical value. I mean, the whole time I'm thinking about my grandparents and that great generation and they would have considered themselves conservative and what that meant. And so, for me, it wasn't so much a party platform. It was what is conservative. And to me, that was respect and humility. And for that generation, I think it was selflessness. You look at, the world wars that they were willing to fight in and what they were fighting for and what they were believing in. And so, it was a time when a handshake was as good as your word, as good as a contract. It was believing in something greater than yourself. And even that part of, if you work hard, then you'll be rewarded for that. I think it's also, it's peacefulness in some regards. So I think Alan hit some of it really right. I think patriotism has changed in what we think that is now. I think in my grandparents' time, they were a little bit more willing to just follow whatever they were told. And I also think there was a different caliber of politicians, not across the board, but there was a different caliber of people who were, quote unquote, running the government. And so I think it was a little bit different there.
I think that that's kind of the whole purpose of, or part of one of the branches of the purpose of this episode. Being conservative really can mean different things. You can be a social conservative. You can be a fiscal conservative. You can be even going as far as to talking about libertarians. I think that that is kind of what it is that we're looking to define and drill down on, talking about the actual values that these ideals were built off of and from the foundation of those values, rather than just today's stereotypes. And so I think that that's really important for us to spend some time unpacking.
Yeah. And I think it's really important to understand, so many people think of conservative as a 4-letter word. People who are only going to vote blue or have more liberal ideals. But I think it's really important to understand there are conservative Democrats. There are conservatives who wear a blue tie.
Ryan always says, he goes, a Texas liberal is a California conservative.
Yeah.
The ideals don't change.
I think that's what's so critical here, is that you can't take and hear the word and just take the definition that pops in your head. You have to ask some questions. You have to listen to what's being said before you know what that definition is for whoever you're talking to. I mean, Cole and I had this whole thing because I said I would consider myself a conservative, and he said no. And I didn't like that very much because, and he says I'm a moderate. And honestly, I'm not quite sure what the difference of that is between being a moderate and a conservative. And so.
No, you're somewhere in the middle.
But that's what I think
most people
conservative
are.
is.
On the modern political spectrum, conservative would be right of moderate. Because here's the thing, and why I would consider myself a conservative. On some issues, I'm going to be further to the right. On some issues, I would be further to the left. Like, I think gay people should be allowed to get married. I think marijuana should be legal. I think that a social support system that is well regulated and maintained and not abused would be of great value to our society. I think public education should be free. I think higher education should be provided for by the society. I think it makes sense to have a society built that way. Those are pretty far to the left.
Okay. I was going to say, I agree with those.
Yeah, those are liberal ideas, generally speaking. But I also think that nuclear families have worked for as long as they have because they operate in a strong manner. That having parents that are married and cooperating with each other is to the benefit of the children of those parents. I think it's much harder.
Those parents look like.
What's that?
No matter what those parents look like.
Yeah, I agree. I think that government should be as small as possible so that the people that are governed can maintain it, can keep it in check. I think that spending should be done responsibly. I think
don't
that
disagree with any of those either.
which are all more conservative, which is why, again, I would consider myself a moderate and not specifically a liberal or a conservative, because I agree with both sides on certain issues.
I think we have to remember, especially in today's day and age, language, specifically the definition of words, has become so fluid.
Yes.
Everything moves, everything changes, everything is defined differently by the next person who says it versus the last. And I
Or
think
the last viral video.
or the last viral video.
Which is a
And
problem.
I was going to say, I think that makes it really, really difficult for anybody, no matter where. I mean, that's why it's a political spectrum, right? You're moving, you're constantly changing. And it makes me think of those, Mom, don't get mad, close your ears. It makes me think of those scales that people had in their homes ages ago or in a doctor's office where there was literally like a little thing that you scooted across to get it to balance and everything. It's a spectrum just like that. And so I think that we have to be really careful to stop stereotyping and stop making these really hard-lined assumptions and saying, oh, well, that's what you are, so never mind. I'm not going to ask you what that means to you. I'm not going to ask you why that matters to you. I'm just going to make the assumption and go off of that. And I think we miss so much when we do that.
Yeah. Just because I believe in the Second Amendment and I think that government should be small doesn't mean I hate gay people or am racist.
Or want children to get shot up in schools.
Yes. And I don't think anybody who is in favor of the Second Amendment is in favor of it because they want children to get shot up in schools. In fact, many of them, I would say, are in favor of the Second Amendment because they think it can help prevent that.
So let's
talk about the history of conservatism, or maybe the origins here a little bit more. So generally speaking, when we talk about the split or the divide in the aisle, my understanding is that it really comes from post-French Revolution democracy in the way that it was set up in France. You had the left and the right, and generally the right was considered the more conservative of the group and the left the more liberal of the group. And there was a gentleman, Edmund Burke, who is often considered the father of modern conservatism. He advocated for a gradual change and preserving social institutions after witnessing the chaos of the French Revolution and seeing how it may have moved too quickly, too radically with that rapid change, and how that came to some detriment to the people in society. So really, really kind of interesting point to touch on here is that conservatism grew out of and developed from classical enlightened liberalism. So there's a lot of to and fro between the American left and the American right, but I think we should all understand that they both came from similar places. They have different ideas on how to get to some place, and they may even have different ideas on what the right place to get to is. And I think that there's merit on both sides.
Sure.
So kind of some of the historical figures that if you guys want to go in and do some of your own research and what their ideas were and where they came from to look into as kind of pillars of conservative ideology, I would look into people like John Adams Sr. I would look at people like Alexander Hamilton as kind of some of that group of early Americans who conservatives oftentimes will reach out to support their ideologies. And then in a slightly more modern sense, you could look to gentlemen like Barry Goldwater, William F. Buckley, and Ronald Reagan as some of the gentlemen who shaped more modern conservative through the 50s, 60s, 70s, and 80s, who have kind of pointed modern conservatism to what it has developed into.
And what do you think they would say? I'm so curious what Ronald Reagan would say if he were alive today about where we are.
What's going on.
Ooh, I think he'd probably be more okay with it than you might expect.
Really?
Yeah.
See, I think the issue here is the extremism, is that we get to the extremism and that bleeds over into that moderate. And maybe not so much in how the moderate functions, but in the interpretation of what it is, and that extreme, because it's so loud and so vocal, that becomes the focus that it really isn't.
The war cry.
So I don't want to spend too much time on the history of conservatism, just because I think it kind of misses the point. I think there are some important things within the history of conservatism that may help people understand why it became or has turned into what it is perceived as in a modern sense. But I think it's really important here, more important here, to highlight some of the nuance of it and how not all conservatives are the same. Not all liberals are the same. And that's something that we'll talk about next week. But I mean, you've got conservative libertarians, then you've got Tea Party, then you've got MAGA, and all three of those believe in kind of different values that they're trying to conserve. They are looking for different outcomes, even though they have some similar beliefs, similar ideas on how to get to those places. And so just like in a lot of the things that we talk about, it's a lot more nuanced. It's more than red or blue. It's more than black or white. There are some gray areas. And so I think to kind of highlight that is a good time to talk about, okay, what should conservatives believe from like a dictionary standpoint? What are their core tenets supposed to be? Not
Again,
to say that that's how all of them act. Right. The foundation.
Okay. So how close was I in my list?
I think you hit a lot.
I think it is restricted government, so that it's not out of control. Sometimes it's easier to say what it isn't than what it is. I do think that there's, for conservative, from my point, that I want some stability. And I think that's where I'm struggling so much in today's world, is that there isn't any stability, or it doesn't feel like there's any stability. It's the next viral moment, whatever that hits.
Yeah. I think it's probably fair to say, in a modern context, conservatism has been hijacked.
By extreme conservatives?
I don't even know that I would say extreme conservatives, but I would probably go with you to say extremists.
Okay.
But I don't think that they're really conserving all that much. I think they are using the guise of conservatism to make changes that they want that are fairly extreme. To me, would be anti-conservative.
Yeah.
And so go ahead.
I was going to say, we put together a list of what we think that the core themes are that are valued by conservatism, because I think it gives us a little bit of an opportunity to push and pull.
Define.
Define. So number one, tradition. Belief that customs, institutions, and longstanding norms exist for a reason and deserve respect. Number two, order and stability. Mom, you kind of talked about this. A desire for social order, hierarchy, and predictability over disruption or revolution. Number three, personal responsibility. Emphasis on individual accountability, self-reliance, and merit. Number four, limited government. Preference for minimal government intervention in private lives and free enterprise. Number five, faith and family. Strong value placed on family structures, religious life, moral attributes, and moral absolutes. Number six, national identity. Pride in cultural heritage, patriotism, and sometimes stricter immigration stances to preserve national character. And number seven, skepticism of utopianism. Awareness towards sweeping ideological movements that promise perfect outcomes. So those are the kind of, in my personal opinion, those are the pillars that on which this foundation is based. Let's talk about family and faith really quick. I'm kind of jumping around. You have people in Texas right now, legislation in Texas that is passing to have the 10 Commandments posted in schools and classrooms. Well, because we want a strong family unit, and because God is important, and because this is what it is, and one nation under God, and all of these things. But is that good for the majority of people? Does that make sense?
I would argue that this is one of those instances where conservatism has been hijacked by a relatively extreme viewpoint.
Yeah,
because,
absolutely.
I mean, this is a pretty radical change considering things historically. The under God part of the Pledge of Allegiance wasn't added until like the 50s or 60s, I think, when the Cold War started,
right?
Specifically like anti-communism. And this is an interesting one that we talked about over the last couple of weeks. I was listening to a JRE episode where he was interviewing James Tallarico, who is a Democrat. who has some liberal ideas, who is also an ardent Christian, who is attending seminary to be a pastor. That's his ultimate goal, is to be a pastor at his home church, which I think is an admirable trait. But he's talking about the founding fathers, and there are a lot of Christian conservatives that seem to rely on this idea that the founding fathers were these
men of God,
these ardent Christians. And if you go back and take a look, a lot of them really weren't. Many at the time would have, in James Talarico's words, been considered deists, which is essentially someone who believes that a creator came, created the planet, created life on it, created man, created them equally, and then left.
clockmakers.
A clockmaker.
I was thinking, I mean, I think the definition of God when the founding fathers was so different. I mean, we've almost defined God out of reality at this point. Or are we only use him as a club to club you over the head because you don't agree with me? And so, you know, I stop and think back in the 1800s, Catholics were anathema. I mean, we thought they were, don't you love how I said that? People thought that they were, you know, ungodly. I mean, they were Catholics, but now then that's not how they're interpreted at all. That's not how they're seen. And so we've changed the perception of how that is interpreted. And my part, I think we need to go back. We need to step back a little bit and go, wait a minute, just because I believe in God and this A, B, and C is how I define him doesn't mean that's how you have to define him too. And that was part of one of the things that I was looking at, is that I believe that conservatism is a belief in a higher power, and that leaves that a little bit more open to interpretation for different people. That doesn't mean that, you know, the Hindus are wrong or the Muslims are wrong. It's still a higher power.
Theirs just has a different name.
Yeah.
Yes.
I mean, one of the primary reasons for the founding fathers rebelling and developing their own nation was
the Church of England.
Religious freedom. Because the rigidity of Catholicism in England was so political, really, at the time, and they were largely Protestant, that Protestants in Europe had just gone through a time period where they were largely being persecuted for not being Catholic. And so having that tenet of religious freedom and that separation of church and state to make them two distinct entities was really, really important and talked about frequently by the founding fathers.
I mean, but going back to even today, you've got all of these people, especially in Texas, especially in Louisiana and states like that, that are very much considered red states, pushing for the 10 Commandments to be in school. I have a hard time wrapping my head around, how is that limited government? How does that make sense? We want you to believe what we believe, and we're going to push it on you, and we're going to mandate that so that you do. Like, that's confusing.
James Talarico had a really interesting idea on this that he talked about. He was talking about Jesus and how Jesus was very much kind of anti-church at the time, because he frequently got into it with the Pharisees and very much challenged their ideology. And if you go back and you listen to what Jesus says in the New Testament, really kind of his whole purpose was he was against that over legalism, the following it to the exact letter. I mean, my interpretation, and again, this is my interpretation of it, is that he was kind of there. His sacrifice was to replace the need for all of these strict written rules, to say, hey, there are two rules. Love me, love your neighbor. That's it.
Yeah. I mean, and I think that we can look at that and see, especially during the election and things like that, you saw lots of people very much on the far left coming out saying, look, Jesus could come out right now and these people on the far right are going to condemn him because that just isn't what they believe. And I think that just goes back to the fluidity of it all. The pendulum, we're way over here, we're way over there. Everything is so easily moved by these waves. I don't think that MAGA is here to stay. I think MAGA is a big wave that is coming through right now. But those waves go back out too. That's just how physics works, And so I think that we're right now kind of riding that wave. That sounds so positive, and I don't feel like that's the case. So please don't misunderstand me. But I feel like we're just kind of riding that wave right now because that is the only option. We're being overwhelmed by that wave in many ways, and this is just what it is. But I do think that the tide will change. I hope that the tide changes for sure.
I mean, it always does. It always has before.
It always does. And so, looking at some of these other things, talking about tradition, talking about order and stability.
Before we move on to those, I want to talk about the family part of that family and faith pillar as well, because this is one where I'm a little bit more on the side of classic conservatism. I think there's a lot to be said for the nuclear family, for the structure. I think that personally, Callie, you and I have a massive advantage because of the way that we were raised, because of the parenting that we received from two well-equipped parents that worked together as a team. And I think a lot of people don't have that. And I think that generally a society that has that built into its framework is probably going to have more successful adults.
But I think Callie's point of that it doesn't have to be a male and a female. Sure. I don't disagree with you on family. I think family is critically important, but I don't think that we can just define that. Because if we start doing that, then we're going to say, okay, well, then the husband has to do this and the wife has to do this, and you have to have 2.3 children and bless that little 0.3 kid because he's not all there. And
I think that negates any other way of looking at a family.
Yes.
And so
that's actually
I know
my point.
people who grew up in foster care, and there were really hard periods of their lives. And then maybe they were lucky enough to end up with a family who loved them the way that my parents loved me. And they still to this day will credit those families. And it wasn't a family that they were born into, and it wasn't their blood family, but it still was their version of a nuclear family. And that mattered to them. And so I think that we need to be, again, a little more fluid with those definitions. It doesn't have to be a mom and a dad. And when two people love each other, they have sex and then babies come from the storks. It can be other methods. There can be other forms of that. And so I think that we need to kind of define what those important characteristics are of the nuclear family. You've got a well-rounded view of people around you who are teaching you things. We go back to single moms and what those moms are lacking because they're not dads, because they don't have that physical appearance and that different weight and levity of all of things.
Mentality.
And so I think that however you get a well-rounded view, I think counts. Great.
Yeah. I'm with you there. I think from my personal perspective, it's easier to do that when you have a mom and a dad. Yeah. I don't think it's impossible to do it if you have two dads or two moms. I think it makes it more challenging. And I'm not saying that doing that is wrong. I think that brings in a greater responsibility to the community around those families to bring those different perspectives, that it takes a village mindset to say, okay, I am missing these perspectives, so I need to provide these for my family. I need to find resources within my community that provide this perspective.
I agree with you wholeheartedly, with the caveat that every single family needs that community. Every single family needs that village, because
regardless of if it's mom, dad, mom,
black,
regardless,
white, doesn't matter. And so we grew up, you're right, we grew up with very capable, kind, loving, intelligent parents who wanted to pass that on to us. Both of our parents were white. And so we have a different perspective of the world than a family who grew up with black parents, that grew up having different struggles than we did. And so I think that that's where the village comes in, getting that well-rounded perspective from somebody more than just my white mom.
All right.
I think I got stuck on it's easier for when you have a mom and a dad for a family, because I mean, my little brain just went because I mean, it's just not easy.
And that's not the point I was trying to make. And I think you're exactly right. But it is easier within that singular cell of a nuclear family for me to have the perspective of, okay, this is the perspective of my mom. This is the way that she approaches things. She tends to be more gentle. She tends to be more nurturing. And then this is the perspective. These are the attributes of my father. He tends to be more stoic. He tends to be more demanding. Having those two different
influences.
Two different influences, you get more coverage.
Yeah. And
I'm saying it's easier for the children to have access to those perspectives, not saying that it's easier for the mom and dad to raise the children. Not what I was trying to imply.
I know my brain just kind of fried on that for the moment. But here's the thing. Families need support. Whatever that family looks like, they need support. And they need a variety of influences, exposures is the word I was looking for. They need a variety of exposures. And that doesn't mean that only one way can do it right.
Sure.
Well, and I think
I've known some great, amazing single moms that I absolutely stand in awe of because they knew that there was a deficit there that they had to figure out. They needed other people to step in and help them. And thank God that there were other people there that were willing to do that. But I think that's part of the family that we're talking about is being willing to step up for other people in need.
Yeah. And I mean, just to kind of illustrate the point, how much harder was it for those single moms?
It was harder. But here's what I'm saying. It's hard to raise a family. It's harder as a single mom to raise a family. We made it harder for even a same-sex family. We've made it harder for them, even though they have the components there that they may need. We've made it harder because of our bias. And there's just no justification for that.
Well, and I think that one of the things that is really important to note here, it isn't a competition. It was easier for me to raise my family than it was for you to raise yours. And there is no scoring that is happening on the sidelines over here by all of these judges. We need to eliminate that from our reality because you can look at it on the outset. Mom, you were raised with a mom and a dad, and you have said on this podcast that your grandparents raised you, but they called them the degenerates.
The juvenile delinquents.
The juvenile delinquents. I mean, but that's not because your parents were childish or anything. You've said, well, I think that there was a selfishness in there, that they had more interest in themselves than raising children.
See, I think that's a perfect example. If I hadn't had my grandparents, I wouldn't have raised y'all the way that we raised y'all.
Right.
Because they were that influence. They were that strength that I drew from because my parents weren't always there to do that with. And so again, I mean, I understand conservative, but conservative doesn't mean the same it's always been and we can't change that. I don't think that's what it stands for.
I think to a certain degree it does, and we can touch on that in the tradition and order and stability parts when we cover those, because I think to a certain degree it does.
There's a difference in stability and always doing it the same way it's always been done.
Right, but that's why I'm saying to a certain degree.
Here's my liberal coming out. Can you read this? There's always a better way to do it. There's another way. We don't always have to do it the same way.
And I don't disagree with you. I just want to make one more illustration here, which is kind of an extreme example. And so I'm not sure how much weight it will carry or water it will hold. Let's think about riding a bicycle. If I have a right arm and a left arm, I can balance on that bicycle pretty easily, right? I can control it with the handlebars. If I don't have a left arm and I have two right arms, it makes it much more difficult for me to ride that bicycle successfully, right? Not to say that I can't, but it makes it harder.
Okay.
I think that is the pragmatic view coming from conservatism that is in support of the nuclear family. I think it is the same mentality there to say, hey, and what is coming across is people with two right arms should not be allowed to ride bicycles. And I think that is wrong, personally.
Yeah.
When it
Lord,
should
you have
be,
some of the weirdest analogies that make so much sense.
But it does, right?
It's aggravating.
Yeah.
And so That is to say, it's much easier to ride a bike with a right arm and a left arm. Not to say that you can't do it with two right arms, just that
you have a less of a pool of a community to help you learn how to do it with two right arms.
yeah.
And going back
you're
to the
more likely to crash.
Maybe not. I mean, you could be an awesome two right-armed bicycle rider. You could be great at it. I mean,
but it's more challenging to do so because your balance is off. If I have to lean over sideways to ride my bicycle, well, balance on a bicycle is really important.
But again, I think that when you're surrounded by a community, you've got somebody in that community that says, hey, before you get on this bicycle, I don't have two right arms, but before you get on this bicycle, you might want to consider this. Hey, let me stand here and hold it for you so that you can figure out where your center of gravity is, what makes sense for you in order to balance this properly. Like going back to using that exact example, except for the two right arms part, my dad rides a bicycle routinely, still to this day. My dad also did not teach me how to ride a bicycle. My friend's dad did. And I still very vividly to this day remember that, and I'm thankful for that. But it wasn't because my dad didn't know how to ride a bicycle, because my dad had two right arms, because I had two right arms, for any other reason. That's just how it happened to come about. And so I think that that's why we've got to be fluid with some of those definitions and saying, hey, we don't care what it is that you look like. We don't care what it is that makes up your community. We just want to make sure that you have a community. The community is the important part. Yeah. You got two right arms, but you've got a community of people who are standing up here to come and help you learn how to ride a bicycle. Awesome. Does that make it harder or easier? I don't know, but the community makes a difference. And so I think that that is one of those things that is important to note. And then going back to conservatism in general, I think it tends to be less accepted because of those traditions, because of those beliefs and customs. Your dad is the one who has to teach you to ride the bicycle. And that isn't always possible or realistic. Or you're ready today and your dad's out fishing while this dad is standing right here. Like whatever that looks like and may mean, I think that for me is part of the downside of the value of tradition. It's like you said a minute ago, sometimes there's a better way. Sometimes there's a different way. And so being open to a different way, to being open to something besides the long-standing norm of only your father is allowed to teach you how to ride a bicycle, and you can only ride a bicycle when you have a right arm and a left arm, being open to other options, I think is really valuable. And I think for me, that's where this conservative value of tradition falls short.
I would be inclined to agree with you. I mean, I made some notes here, don't fix what, quote, isn't broken. But I think there's some things under conservatism that probably are broken, that we can do differently, that we can do better.
Well, and it doesn't have to be totally and completely shattered. A chip could mean it's still broken. It doesn't have to be completely useless before you start examining it.
Or
it could be that we need to add a counterweight to that bike to make it easier for someone with two right arms to balance.
Yes.
Yeah. Or it could be that we've learned a little bit more along the way, and so there's an easier way to do some of this.
Yeah.
And it's not that it's not working. It's just sometimes there might be a better way, just from perspective of the perspective that's been gained from the history of this. There may be a better way.
What if we never progressed past round stones being wheels on vehicles?
It's the same thing.
It's the same thing.
They worked.
They worked. They totally did. What an innovation. But we can't stop innovating because it works. We have to be
there
open.
were people at the time when they switched from round stones to wooden ones who said, well, I would never use a wooden wheel because what if it breaks? It'll break so much easier. I'm going to stick to the stone one.
Ignorance will play a role in every society.
Sure, but I mean,
that's not even ignorance. They're right. A wooden wheel is going to break easier, most likely, than a stone one.
It depends. If you take a sledgehammer to the stone one, it's shattering.
Yeah,
if you take a sledgehammer to the wooden one,
either one of them, it's going to shatter.
Not necessarily. A wooden one, hitting a 2x4 with a hammer just dips it.
Sometimes. Hit it in the right place, you're going to shatter it.
Sure.
So let's go back. Let's go to personal responsibility, because I love this one. Because I think this is a huge one for me. That's where the respect and the integrity and the honor comes into me, that I'm not expecting you to behave one way and I get free reign, which is a lot of what I'm seeing in today. I mean, there's so many stories that just crack me up. Well, so-and-so did X. And so, they need to go to jail, but you just did it too. And so this deal of, it's an old saying, but what's good for the goose is good for the gander. If we can't be even in our expectations, then there is no stability here. There is no responsibility.
Well, I guess I'm not quite tracking with you on that one. I kind of lost you there.
Okay. If I'm going to be respectful of you, then I expect you to be respectful of me. If I'm going to live my life with a level of integrity, I want everybody else to live with a level of integrity. And I don't think that I can call you out on your lack of integrity if I've failed in mine. Does that help?
Now I'm tracking with you. Yeah, I would agree. And and that's kind of what I have written here. Everyone should have to play by the same rules, no exceptions, and those rules should be clear and rock solid. And then you get what you earn, and what you earn should depend on how hard you work, not how well you cheat. And I think those are kind of the foundations of order and stability under conservative values, is that everybody should be on the same everybody should be on the same playing field. You shouldn't get to cheat other people. But if I'm better at something than you, I'm better than you. That's just the way it is. I shouldn't have to now cater to you so that we're equal. I shouldn't have to lower myself in that specific regard to say, well, they're not as skilled or talented or capable in this specific arena. So now I have to handicap myself so that we can be even, we can be equal. I think that's the foundation of that idea.
I think we've had this discussion before about what equal means. And equal doesn't mean exactly the same. That sounds weird. It doesn't mean exactly the same, but it means that we are given the same opportunities.
Sure, the same opportunities, but that doesn't guarantee equal outcomes.
Exactly. I mean, Cole, I'm never going to be able to keep up with you and the things that you remember, because you have this incredible memory that just absorbs all of that stuff. I'm going to be standing over here looking like a ditz because I don't have that photographic memory that you seem to have. But there are things that I will outshine you on.
Sure.
I mean, here you go. You won't ever be as good of a mom because you can't be a mom.
100%. And that's kind of the point that I'm trying to get at here. That doesn't mean that you and I shouldn't be equally represented within society, but there are things that I will be better at than you, and the same for you.
Yeah. And I'm going to be proud of you for those things that you're better at than me. And I want that same respect.
How does that work in terms of social order and hierarchy? How do you apply that?
I think it comes with you get what you earn.
Wait. So are you saying that Zuckerberg, because he out earns me by millions of dollars, should get more opportunity than I do?
Well,
or should be represented government-wise more so than me?
You.
Personally, I don't believe that. I also think that there are some things that Zuckerberg has done to get where he is that should be against the rules.
Probably were.
So I get what you're saying, but
so the rules
did you
should
have
be
the same access to education that Zuckerberg had?
I mean,
I don't think he graduated college.
That's what I was thinking too.
Okay.
Not that he couldn't afford it.
Well, not at the time. He wasn't
really
a billionaire at the time.
He wasn't far from it at the time, though. Because why didn't he graduate?
Because he could make more money doing what he was doing than to go to school. It didn't serve him well.
Yeah. And so he used those to his advantage. And now he has a place in society that is elevated.
So, but what does that elevation look like? What does that mean? What does him having reached that level
He gets
get
more
him?
stuff.
Stuff
Okay.
I can follow with.
Here's where I'm at. Yes, he can buy more stuff, but his representation in the government shouldn't be any different than mine.
And I completely agree. And that should be, to me, one of the bases of conservative ideas.
Yes.
Yeah.
We're in agreement.
Yeah.
Everybody gets a seat at the table. Everybody gets a say. And just because you have more money than me doesn't give you more
say.
leverage.
And I think that it should be one of the tenets that we understand here, particularly under order and stability, is to say, hey, everyone needs to be represented equally, regardless of what your skills and talents are.
Yeah.
You still matter because you still provide things of value that Mark Zuckerberg doesn't.
But I think that that's one of the things that we need to recognize, that in all of this fluidity, things have gone a little too far this way. Sure. And we've veered away from the values of conservatism into, I don't know what you want to call it, but we can't keep claiming, and I'm not saying we, the three of us, I'm saying we as a people, we can't keep claiming conservative values when it's not. We can't keep trying to disguise it as something else. And I think that tends to happen a lot, especially in conservative land. Well, this is what the Bible says, or this is what Christianity would do, and this is what it is. So this is the most important thing. So I'm a conservative, and that's what matters. I'm a conservative, and so that counts. And I think that we have, again, veered off course of the original intention, and we're putting lipstick on the pig.
And I think that's fair.
Yeah. I just wish that we could recognize that. We could do a better job of recognizing that as a society. Okay, hold on. You want to do this, and I get that you want to do that for you, but how does that actually align with our values? How does that actually align with who you say that you are? And I think that is kind of the accountability that we're missing and lacking right now, because we're just going to call it conservatism and call it a day. And I think that we've forgotten any of the rest of the accountability of it.
Sure. I think that's fair.
Which is really funny, because literally the next one on our list is personal responsibility, and emphasis on individual accountability, self-reliance, and merit.
Yeah.
And I think that it's harder to be policed because it's not fun. And so we just choose to not do it.
Yeah, I think there's a huge problem with accountability in our society today. Yeah. It's always somebody else's fault when something goes wrong.
Yeah.
I want to touch on something here under personal responsibility, because this one hits pretty close to home for me here. We talk about an emphasis on individual accountability, self-reliance, and merit. And one thing that I see happening rampantly in society today, and this is not just in the United States, this is across the world, is I made a point here: just because someone else can't behave doesn't mean I should have my rights restricted.
Yeah.
So just because someone else is using a gun to do bad things doesn't mean that my ownership of a gun is bad. It doesn't mean I'm going to use a gun to do bad things.
Yeah.
Just because someone else drives a car through a crowd of protesters doesn't mean I'm going to. So I should not have my rights restricted as to what I can and can't, and where I can and can't take my vehicle. One bad apple does not necessarily spoil the bunch when you're talking about society-wide. So using one individual's actions to restrict the rights of everyone else, to me, I think is wrong. And I think that that's a really good illustration of why conservatism has a tendency to emphasize personal responsibility.
But it has to be done. And I feel like we're not doing it right now.
Again, I agree with you. But the point isn't to say we're doing conservatism right or wrong. The point is to say, what should the values of conservatism be? What should we be using as the foundation for our thought process here? Not necessarily what is, so that hopefully we can clearly define these things so that people who say, I agree with that, now I have to hold myself accountable to these tenets, to these values.
Well, and I think that we've got to call it out, which is what my goal is. Like, hey, if you want to call yourself a conservative, that's totally fine. But I think you need to be realistic and educated, our favorite topic over here, about what that actually is and means, so that you know how to not only police yourself, but police the people around you, police your village. Because if we can all independently police ourselves and police our villages around us, hey, Mecca, you're a little out of line. Hey, Cole, you went a little too far on this. Hey, Mecca, is that really what you meant? Because I don't think that that's what you stand for. I think that we have an opportunity to do a better job of living those values.
Yeah, I think the point here, and not to say that this point is right or wrong, but I think the general idea behind this personal responsibility is that if everyone held themselves accountable, if everyone were to police themselves well enough, we wouldn't have to police other people.
But again, that's community. That's perspective. Hey, Cole, your perspective is short-sighted because you've never experienced this thing that I have. And so I think, and I said it, and I don't think policing is really the right word, but I couldn't think of a better one when I said it. But I think that it truly is holding each other accountable. And I think that you have to be able to do that. That's why you have accountability partners, because we're not capable of doing that ourselves effectively. So I think that we have to hold ourselves accountable first and then hold each other accountable. And I think that we're humans. We're all going to screw up. We're all going to come up short. We're all going to be wrong. And having a relationship and a village of people around you that you trust, that love you, that know your heart and your intentions presents the opportunity to come in and say, hey, Kelly, you're not hitting this right.
Yeah.
Let's work on this.
I think another kind of thing to touch on here is that if you're in a community and everyone is holding themselves accountable, it makes it a lot easier to see when someone isn't.
Yes, I agree.
Right now, when no one is holding themselves accountable, who knows what the cause of the problem is?
Right.
Who can identify it? Who can get the log out of their own eye?
Yeah.
Interesting.
So I want to skip really quick to national identity, because I think that that is certainly something that is very, very much happening in our society right now. We've got, and I know we're not talking specifically about politics, but I do want to kind of weave it back into the intention. I think that when we look at national identity, pride in cultural heritage, patriotism, and sometimes stricter immigration stances to preserve national character, when we apply that to real life, I think that this is our opportunity to hold ourselves and each other accountable and say, hey, is that really what we intended to do? Is that really the best solution? Does that really make the most sense? I think that you would have a really hard time making a case for what's going on in immigrations as a country right now, that is rooted in traditional conservative values.
I understand what you're saying. I think that this one, and here's another really important thing to point out, is that all of these tenets very much lean and rely on each other and are dependent upon each other from a different perspective. And I'm not saying I disagree with what you're saying, but from modern conservatives' perspective, I think it makes sense to say, hey, this is out of control. This is too much. This is going to lead to instability and disorder. So we have to stop this now. I think that the way that it's being handled currently is largely without compassion and empathy. And I think that that is unfortunate and wrong.
So let me clarify that, because I want to understand this. So if you're talking about immigration and it being out of control, is that just the illegal part of it?
Yeah.
Or is there more?
Well, for one, I think that there should be a more efficient manner of legal immigration. But
Agreed.
Even if there is, there still has to be some way to gauge and measure it. Just like with our economic system, the way that it's currently run, the Fed basically creates and destroys money in an effort to try and maintain a certain pace of economic growth or deceleration. The same concept can be applied to population. If you have a system that is designed for a certain number of people, if you have an economy that is based on a certain number of people, and then you start drastically changing that one variable at a very rapid rate, your plan now no longer works. You no longer have that level of stability because that variable, one of those variables is changing. And when that variable is changing at an unpredictable, unknown rate, it makes it all that much harder to account for. And so now the society now has an opportunity to begin to suffer because of that instability. Most political conservatives are largely in favor of immigration if it is done the right way, well regulated and well maintained, which is interesting for conservatives as they tend to believe in a limited government. But I understand where they're coming from in this instance. Don't come at me with the criminals. And does it happen? Absolutely. Is that the vast majority of them? No, I don't think it is. I think it's people who want to come here and provide a better life for themselves and their families. And that's something that we as Americans should be proud of and should stand for.
And benefit
from. And we do benefit from it every day. Mm-hmm. That said, that is still a variable that I personally believe needs to be very carefully controlled because of the impact that it can have. If you start having these large waves of people who are not accounted for within the system, that system now begins to be less efficient.
I think that we have to take a little bit of a step back here. I would have a hard time saying that the immigration system in this country has ever been effective, has ever been a well-oiled machine, has ever been efficient in any capacity. And so I think going back to our episode last week, we need to be asking more questions about why that is so that we can come up with better solutions rather than just say, oh, get them all out. Like that isn't going to be successful either. That is not asking why. That is not getting down to the heart of the issue and actually addressing it. And especially the way that it's being done and executed right now, I think is inhumane, best case. But I think that we can't just sit here and say, oh, well, if everybody was doing this all legally, then it would work because the system is so far gone. Do I think that in theory, conceptually, that should work? Yes, I do. Once the system is fixed, which I think has to be completely revamped from start to finish.
Right. But oftentimes, in order to correct a system, you have to clear it out. So while I don't disagree with you that the way that it's being handled right now isn't correct, I do think that there is some merit to the idea that, hey, if there is a huge population of people that are unaccounted for in the system, those people need to be removed so that we can incorporate them the right way.
They could also just be accounted for because I think that this is where things get really off of the rails. Having everybody removed in a clean slate is a privilege, is an absolute privilege. When you're cleaning out your bedroom, trying to get rid of all of the things that you don't want anymore, you don't have the right to just move out of your whole entire house and then start back over. That's a privilege. And so I think that, is that one way to get it done? Yes, absolutely. Is it the only way to get it done? No, it isn't.
I don't even think it's possible to clear it out.
No.
But again, and I want to define this. There is a difference between dealing with people who have illegally come into this country and people that we granted a right to come into this country. There is a difference in those. And if we flip our minds on that all of a sudden, we don't want you anymore. We're going to get rid of you. That's where
everyone suffers. Everyone suffers.
You do. I mean, maybe not everyone, but there's an impact felt. And so I want the definition not to just be immigration, because there are some amazingly positive things about immigration. I want this to be defined as illegal immigration, and I want it to be focused on illegal immigration.
Yeah. And generally, I think most conservatives would agree with you.
I would agree with them.
And this is not me defending the way that it's being handled right now.
I know.
But I also understand why they are handling it the way that they are.
I do not.
I do not. Okay. I feel like we just went right over. We left conservative, Callie, and went right over to liberal.
Yep.
Nope.
Yeah. So
because I don't understand the randomness.
I don't understand how masked men refusing to show any kind of proof of who they are, kidnapping people, adults, children, and taking them away and locking them into concentration camps is
cages.
Yeah, no, I don't understand that.
And I don't understand how, if you've gone through the process and you've done what you were supposed to do, revoking that. I don't understand that part. And we've tangented off of our topic here.
Yeah. I think it's a lot more nuanced than we have time to discuss on this episode.
Yeah.
Okay. So
one of the primary pillars of conservatism is having limited government. There was, I believe he was French, Alexis de Tocqueville believed that extensive engagement of government in the economy makes people feel less responsible for society, and that responsibility for society would need to be taken over by the government, requiring higher taxes. And I think that to a certain degree, that makes sense. If it's just like, if I can stick my hand out and an apple appears, or if I have to go find a tree and pick an apple, which one am I going to pick?
You're talking about abdication of responsibility.
To a degree, yeah.
And I get that. I know I am a proponent of limited government. And there's a couple of facets of that. One is I think that I should pretty much be able to live my own life without government telling me what I can and cannot do. What color should your hair be? What car should you drive? What kind of car you should drive? Where you send your kids to school? What they can study?
How many kids you have?
Let's go with the education part. There's a spot there where you want to say, this is the baseline. Every school in the nation, this should be the baseline of education. And anything that you can do above that, we're not going to say anything about as a government. But we are responsible for this baseline. And so the responsibility there to me comes to that communication, not necessarily the policing of, but the communication of, here's the baseline. And we can test you and make sure that you're hitting the baseline so that you know. And we can compare that with everybody else. I think those are beneficial things. But I think the other things where your government may overstep, that's where I don't want my government getting involved in everything that I do.
Yeah. And I think that is kind of the basis of where the conservative mindset comes from in this case, is that we as people should be accountable for ourselves and our actions, and we shouldn't have to rely on the government to tell us what is right and wrong. That goes back to a lot of the things that we've already talked about here under personal responsibility, is I shouldn't be held accountable for someone else's wrongdoing. If I can do something without harming the people around me, I should be able to do that thing. It shouldn't be up to the government to tell me I can or I can't. Because the more the government has to tell people they can or cannot do, the more they have to tax people so that they can pay for the enforcement of those rules. I personally am in favor of careful regulation because I think rampant capitalism in the long run is probably not great for a society in the long term. I think that there needs to be careful regulation, not necessarily heavy regulation. I think that there should be very specific rules that entities and individuals have to follow to maintain stability and order. But outside of those rules, I don't think that the government should be expanding.
I don't disagree with that.
But the more of those rules you have, and the larger your population becomes, the larger the government has to expand. And the more the government expands, the harder it is to force it to contract. The more rights that you have taken away, the harder it is to get those rights back. So I think that is kind of the foundational basis of that idea of limited government. One, because we should be able to decide what we do with our own money. Getting taxed 40, 50, 60, 90% on your income is not really attractive to anyone. But the more government you have, the closer you're going to have to get to that. So all of these different regulatory agencies, to a degree, I think some of them are necessary. Others, I think, are an overreach personally, which would have me fairly squarely in the conservative camp on that specific issue. And I think that's kind of where they're coming from. The other one here is going to be social assistance, which again touches very heavily on the personal responsibility pillar that we've already talked about. Do I think that we as a society should help people that are going through a hard time? Yes. But I think that assistance should have some requirements. Like, hey, we're here to help you get back up on your feet, but you have to be trying to get back up on your feet.
A hand up, not a handout.
Hand up, not a handout. Exactly. I think that is a very, very thin razor to walk that has very slippery slopes on either side. And I think that is why, generally speaking, conservatives say we would rather less of this than more of this because it is so difficult to navigate.
I understand that.
Well, and you're never going to please everybody.
Sure. Are there people that take advantage of those systems? Yeah, absolutely. Are there people who use those systems to better themselves? 100%. They use them the correct way. And I think that we should be in favor of programs like that. But I think those programs should also have their limits. I don't think that they should just be an endless supply, a hand up, not a handout.
Well, and again, I don't want that to be the status quo. I think we need to be looking at those to see what has changed, what needs to change, how can we make this better, how can we help people the most economically way that we can to get back on their feet.
But should we be doing that as individuals for the other individuals in our community, or should we be relying on the government to do that?
Well, That's a
I think
tricky
that's
question.
where the split is ideologically.
Yeah, I don't want to rely on the government, but I also know that there's a lot of things that I, as an individual, can't weigh in on.
Sure. But if we were to have a community that maybe had a council that was specifically their whole purpose as a group, they meet one time a week for 30 minutes to say, hey, this is what's going on in our community. These are the people that need help. Let's brainstorm some ideas to help them. And that's
The problem is we do have those groups, but they're so disjointed. And that's probably where I, would see, and I'm not trying to expand the government, but if you have 6 groups in 6 different locations having that discussion, but they're not talking to each other, then there's no uniformity or there's no really good plan. We're coming at it from 6 different ways. That's what I see the government is being responsible for, is to coordinate all of those efforts and come to a conclusion of how. Does the government have to take care of all of that? No. But I think the government has a responsibility to pull all of the information together because they have that oversight. They have that ability to see different places and different things.
I mean, first and foremost, I think that social services need to be evaluated and say, hey, how many people are using this? How long are they using it? Is this an effective use of funds and all of that? I think that you can make a case that that's what DOGE was originally set out to do and intended to do. I don't think that they did a good job at that. I do think that that needs to be with a scalpel rather than a machete. But I think that when you're sitting there talking about, oh, those costs add up, I think that that's true and I think that that's right. But at the same time, like taking money from every single household in this country also adds up. Those taxes also add up. And so I think it matters and depends on where we decide to prioritize them, which is the political ideological divide, right? Hey, we're going to prioritize military versus social programs. Hey, we're going to prioritize paying attention to this instead of that. And so I think that that kind of is where that social divide really lies. And so I don't think that we can sit here and just say, oh, well, social services cost money, so they're bad. We want to be fiscally conservative, so they're bad. And so I think that it just, like Cole says, it has to be more nuanced than that. We have to dig in a little bit deeper. And I don't think, going back to the accountability part of it, even from a personal accountability to a governmental accountability, we have to come in and say, hey, how is this all being handled? How is it being utilized? How much is it costing? Is the juice worth the squeeze? And I'm not trying to put anybody out on their butt saying, hey, nobody cares about you. You're only one of 10 people, so no one cares. That's not what I'm saying, but we have to make sure that it makes sense.
Yes.
Maybe that's the thing. I want government to make sense.
And Cole's right. We have to pay for those people to go in and make sense of that. And I think if we're being really freaking realistic, those are worthy costs.
To a degree. And again,
to a
degree, I am for certain levels of social assistance with accountability.
Yes.
And I think that is the limitation to government that they're not for no government. Right. They're just for people policing themselves more than the government policing them.
I think that the fear, at least for me as somebody who would not classify myself as a conservative, I think that the fear for me comes from that's just not happening. Nobody is policing themselves. And so why would I trust anybody to do it?
I think that's a valid concern. I think that's a cultural issue, not necessarily a political one.
I agree.
But I do think that the
cultural
current political approach is fueling that fire.
Yes, I agree.
So let's talk about the word conservatism. It comes from conserve. What is it conserving and why? So we've talked about kind of the foundational tenets, the pillars of conservative values. What values or traditions do you feel are worth preserving regardless of your political leanings?
I think that there's a lot to be said about equality. Man versus woman, Black versus white, from this country or not. I think that there's a lot to be said about equality. And I stated my stance on, I think that our immigration system is horribly broken and needs to be very much rectified. But I think that building our village, our small Calico and Mecca village, as well as our America village, is a worthy cause. And having diverse perspectives and diverse experiences is valuable. and worth preserving. I think that that's how this country was originally formed and was the intention of that. I don't think we've always done a very good job at doing that with compassion, empathy, reality at our backs. But I think that the diversity of thought is important.
I would agree. I think most conservatives with that specific example would tell you we want a shower head hanging out of our wall, not a fire hose. I think that's kind of the thought process. So you're talking about immigration reform, which I think everyone agrees with, that there needs to be a more efficient, not everyone. I think generally most people agree with. Are there xenophobic people within the United States? Absolutely. 100%. Are there racists? Yes, there are. I don't think that by and large that makes up the majority of the population. But I do think that population wants a faucet that they can turn on and off and control the flow of in a regulated manner so that they don't overfill the bathtub. They don't just want a hole in the pipe that's gushing water all of the time.
And I think that that's reasonable.
I think that we want to conserve a standard of living that we as Americans normally appreciate and that not everyone has. I think we want to conserve what we anticipate to be the American way, but we have to understand that that is not the American way for everyone and that everyone deserves that. So I think that being conservative means acknowledging that not everyone has the same opportunity, that not everybody sees it the same way. And while I want to preserve the good of that, I need to recognize the areas that we have the bad in too.
The reality at the same time.
I don't think it's always, that this is the tradition, but I also think tradition, I don't know if tradition is for the government. I think tradition is for individuals.
People.
Interesting.
I do think it's wanting to preserve stability, but I also think it's recognizing that there's change needed sometimes and that we cannot go from point A to B to C to D and always do the same thing. There's going to be variance there and I don't want it to go off the rails. I want an ability for people to look at it and understand it and be open-minded and make changes where changes are needed without going off the rails.
Yeah, I think that really illustrates the point of conservatism is it's not as much about keeping things exactly how they are now. Some people view it that way. Sure. It's not about keeping things exactly how they were 10 years ago. And again, some people see it that way. And I don't think that really is true conservatism. I think the idea, like you said, Mom, we have to go from A to B to C to D to E. We can't go straight from A to E because that brings chaos. That's not structured. It brings instability and disorder when things move so quickly. I think that really should be kind of one of the overarching themes behind conservatism is that it's not that progress can't or shouldn't be made. It's that we have to be careful with the progress that we make to make sure that it's advantageous for everyone.
Yeah.
And I don't think that's the way it's being applied right now, but I do think that should be the outlook.
I don't think conservatism is bad.
But I think it has a really bad taste in people's mouth because of the look that it's taken on right now.
I think it does too, Callie, but I think part of that is the knee-jerk reaction that we have. I mean, if you want to go and say conservative is the status quo, then that does look like that's misogyny or inequality. And I don't think that's really what conservative is.
Going back to the very beginning, I don't think the policies that are being enacted right now are very conservative, in my personal opinion. I think they're, in many cases, rather extreme, disguised as or conservatism that has been hijacked.
Yeah. I mean, I think so many of the stereotypes that we're looking at and facing have left a bad taste, but I don't know that they're really accurate.
I'm taking a look at the stereotypes that you have here. The last one, conservatives fear progress. I think that's probably the only one that is accurate for true conservatives. And I don't know that it is as much a fear of progress. It is a fear of the instability brought about by progress that comes too quickly.
I understand that.
I mean, I get where you're coming from, and I'm not saying that conservatives fear progress is wrong, because I think in general that has something to do with it. But I think that the stem of that fear, the root of that fear, is deeper than just fearing progress, that they want everything to stay the same. I think it has more to do with they fear things changing too quickly.
I think that, so I have 4 listed there about those stereotypes. And I think that our comments just on that one post, putting it up on the internet, asking people what they thought conservative values are, what they think are, illustrates how true those ring right now. And I'm sad about that.
Yeah.
Not because I want conservatives to rule the world, or not because I think that they're the best thing since sliced bread, but that it's so adamantly perceived reality for so many people.
Yeah.
And that worries
I think
me.
it's a perceived reality for a lot of people, but by and large, I don't think it's actually true. But again, I don't think that the current administration speaks for the majority of conservative people. I think it speaks for a very small faction of conservatives. I think the vast majority of people are moderate. Some of them have conservative leanings, but I mean, I don't think the current administration represents me, and I would consider myself to be relatively conservative.
Which
I
I
would
think
consider
is-
myself to be a moderate, but
I think is kind of part of my fear and my point in all of this. The current administration is using the guise of conservatism to make all of these changes, to do all of these things, to change things that have happened and come before them just because they don't like them, and blaming it on conservatism. Well, this is what people
No,
want.
they're not blaming it on conservatism. They're blaming it on liberalism, but they're presenting it as our
Yes.
thoughts here are conservative. And
Yes.
so it's a disguise that they're using,
Yes.
and they're using liberals as the enemy. And I
and
don't
I think it
that's
makes the people
accurate.
that are conservative look bad
Yeah.
because it's been hijacked.
But what does it take in order to take it back, to take your ideals back? I think
You have to pay attention.
that that's true. I do.
Yeah.
I think that that's true, but I think that that goes back to the accountability of it. And so therefore it goes back to speaking up and speaking out. Being silent just creates an opportunity for them to continue. And so I think that you have to speak up and you have to say, I reject this. I reject this line of thinking. I reject this line of execution in whatever it is, because this is not real.
Understand that.
And I think that the quieter people are, the more you allow it to happen. And I think that at some point you have to recognize that you're just as much a part of the problem as the guy in the White House who's signing executive orders to take all of this away.
But I really do, Kelly. I think it's disguised.
Mhm.
And so, like Cole said, you have to be paying attention
Mhm.
because the disguise is there and it kind of looks right and it kind of feels right. It's just a little off unless you're willing to stop and really get your gut involved in there and figure out why it's off. It can just pass right on by because it's disguised pretty well.
That's apathy, though. Like, you have to be educated. You have to be paying attention, exactly like Cole said. And so if you're not willing to do those things, you're not willing to stop somebody from using the term that you believe in so deeply that you've created an entire life and perspective around, you're still at fault. Falling asleep at the wheel and causing an accident, you're still at fault.
Yeah, you're right. But I also wish that we had a system and a society that maybe we didn't have to watch our government so closely because they were already doing the right thing.
Sure.
I don't think that's where we are,
But
which
don't
is
we
really
have to
unfortunate.
figure out what those right things are first before we can start allowing
Yeah.
somebody else to do them?
I mean, I think that's reasonable.
Okay. Give me a weird thought.
All right. Weird thought today. This is one that popped into my head a few weeks ago. I was just kind of thinking and reminiscing about a time in my life when I could have made some different choices. And so I was just kind of thinking about it. I was like, what if I did do it different? What if my life was different? What if my family life growing up had not been the same? What if I'd only had mom? What if I'd only had dad? What if I didn't have Callie and Trey? What if I didn't have any siblings? How different would I be now than how I am? So just kind of using that as a thought exercise, I was just kind of, I think it's really interesting to like try and predict your alternate path based on like just like subtle or even major changes to your own personal history to think about, okay, where would I be if this had happened? Where would I be now if this had happened? Like, what if I had focused more in school and gotten better grades? What if I had gone to college and gotten a degree? What if my name was different? What if I wasn't Cole Garrett Trueblood? What if I was John Trueblood or Paul Trueblood? It was just kind of a really interesting thought experiment at the time. And it's not to say that like I regret any of those decisions or regret where my life is right now, because I mean, personally, I think I'm quite blessed. But it was really interesting to kind of think about.
I'm sitting here trying to figure out if it had just been me and you, if you'd been the only child and I didn't have your dad to balance. I can't decide if I would have drowned you early
I was
on
about to say, drown me in the bathtub.
or if you would have, I mean,
Family values. Here we go.
I mean, because you were a different kid to raise. So doing that alone would have been really hard. And
If Cole was your first child, would you have had a second?
That's a really interesting thought.
Yeah, that's a great thought.
Obviously, yes, because who wouldn't want more of me? But
Obviously, no, because that would have been overwhelming. Obviously not, because she didn't.
Yeah. I mean, but, it is, it's an interesting thought. I mean, I worked for the same company for 25 years. What would have happened if I moved every 2 years? Would my life be worse or better or different? Would I live in Texas or would I live in Florida, California? That it's interesting to think about what would have been different.
Yeah. I mean, I feel like the more you kind of sit here and ruminate on it all, the more you go, weird.
Does it make you grateful for what you do have?
I think so, yeah. When you start thinking about, okay, if things had been worse, yeah, it definitely does. But I think more than anything, it's just kind of an exercise in opening your mind up a little bit.
Yeah.
Thinking, what if?
Yeah. For me, it's certainly not going to a point of gratitude or lack thereof, but a place of curiosity.
Mm-hmm.
What could this have looked like?
If I had enlisted when I was 18, what would my life look like today?
Yeah. Spend some time thinking about what if this had been different or you'd chosen that fork instead of the other. And
what if you'd married your first girlfriend or boyfriend?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
What if you'd had kids when you were 18?
Yeah.
What if you didn't live in Texas? Because there's an identity
I
there.
got here as fast as I could.
It's an interesting thought, kind of a fun one to play. And Cole, I'm hoping that I wouldn't have drowned you.
Yeah.
There were times though. But
yeah, I'm sure. I'm sure that would have been an interesting timeline to watch.
Yes, it would have.
So
I think I'd have a lot more gray hair.
So good news, Mom didn't drown Cole and he's still alive and everything is still trucking forward. What other kind of good news you got for us, Mom?
I have a good story for you. There's a camp on the Guadalupe River in Texas. It's about 30 miles down from Camp Mystic. It's called Camp. Camp stands for Children's Association of Maximum Potential. And that's a mouthful to say, so we just say Camp. It is a place for young people too disabled to attend other camps to go. And it's a time in their lives that they can get away from, their normal routine, which involves doctors and medical devices, and not that they're leaving their medical devices, but and the challenges that they face on a day-to-day. And they actually get to ride horses. I mean, they have enough counselors around that they can get them on a horse. Somebody follows them maybe with their ventilator. They make sure that they don't fall off. It's a complete rarity due to their disabilities. Well, Camp had not opened yet prior to the July 4th floods, and everybody was scheduled to be coming in. But amidst all of that debris, search teams were still actively looking for survivors. Fear was still going on. We had so many people missing at that point in time that the camp staff thought they were going to have to call off the camp. And there are kids they've been coming for 10 years. And so they just thought it would be a gargantuan disappointment for those planning to arrive. But a man named Cord Shiflett is an Austin real estate guy, got involved in disaster relief when Hurricane Harvey hit Houston in 2017 and apparently found a calling. And so he had gone down after the floods to see what he could do and how he could help. And once he heard about this, he sent out a Facebook post. He has over 66,000 followers on his Facebook post. You should go and look. It's Cord Shiflett. It's pretty fascinating. He has a 501c3 that he's established. I'm not endorsing this. I don't know anything about his 501c3, but I can tell you he does a lot of work and he is around and about all of the time. But he sent out a message when he figured out what was going on at Camp Camp. And he said, I need money, manpower, and machines. We do not need people in athletic shorts showing up with a rake. We need the biggest, baddest muscle we can find to work our tails off. And the next morning, 250 people showed up. And by Thursday, that number had doubled. And they started cleaning the camp and they got it ready. And they brought chainsaws and dump trucks and excavators and heavy equipment. And they got it ready. And the kids, they got delayed by one day because of rain. But the kids got to come to camp this year because he was organized enough to find people who would come together. And so I think he's awesome. I'm sure happy that he knows the biggest, baddest, coolest people in the state.
We should have put a link to his page in the show notes. I mean, what a good heart.
Great heart.
Thankful.
And just not his first time. He has a play on his name. His name is Cord. And so he has a play on his name that he coordinates things. And I mean, it's from helping people clean out their homes that have been flooded to cleaning out an entire camp with excavators and dump trucks in 4 days' time so that kids can get ready to come to camp.
One reprieve
cool.
that they have.
Yeah.
I love it.
So, good story.
Good story.
Love you guys.
Love y'all.
I do too.